Chapter 1. The Council's Command. Greyseer Skrivax twitched nervously, claws tapping against his staff as he approached the council chamber. The dark, twisting corridors of Skavenblight, choked with the rank stench of sweat and fear, closed around him as his tail flicked in agitation. Yes, the council would surely praise his cunning brilliance today. They must, for who else but he could bring them such vital information? Rumors of the Lost Gate, ancient dwarvish stone burrows, brimming with priceless runes. Yes, all his discovery, his intelligence. He could already taste the glory. He could imagine his name echoing across the Under-Empire, spoken with awe, fear, and respect. Skrivax, the wise, the cunning, the master of secrets. The chamber stretched wide and dim, lit only by a faint green-ascribed doors of the council chamber. With a quick mutter of a prayer to the horn rat, he pushed them open and stepped inside. The chamber stretched wide and dim, lit only by a faint greenish glow from bubbling warpstone lanterns that cast flickering, sickly shadows across the robed figures of the Council of 13. Their red eyes fixed on him, gleaming in the half-darkness. Skrivax forced a respectful bow, even as he felt his claws twitch with ambition. Yes, yes, all would be well. They would see his value. They would reward him, promote him. "Greyseer Skrivax," one of the council members hissed, voice oozing with dark authority. "Your discovery of the Lost Gate. Impressive, yes. Yes, most cunning." Skrivax's tail gave a pleased twitch. He straightened, daring to meet the eyes of the robed figure. "Yes, yes, Council. Only I could find sense such a place, and I know how best to breach it." Silence, the council member cut him off with a sharp snap. "You will lead the assault. Yes, but there is, another." A faintly malicious chuckle rippled through the council as they exchanged gleaming glances. "Another," Skrivax hissed, his fur bristling at the interruption. Yes, another council member intoned with delight. "Queek Headtaker will join you." The name hit him like a sack of dung. Queek Headtaker, that savage, barely sane monstrosity. Skrivax's claws dug into his staff as he forced himself not to bare his teeth. "Council, please, I am most cunning. Queek is, crack the stupid. He will ruin our victory." Silence. The council's voices layered over one another, a terrible chorus that brooked no dissent. "You will have Queek Headtaker as your co-commander. Together, yes, the Lost Gate will fall, crumble, and all within will be ours." Skrivax's whiskers twitched furiously, his mind spinning with schemes and plots. Fine, he would accept. Yes, yes. He could turn this to his advantage. Queek was simple, all rage and slaughter, a tool easily manipulated if he could keep the brute pointed in the right direction. Skrivax bowed again, swallowing his resentment. "Yes, yes. For the glory of the Under-Empire," he said, though bile burned his throat with each word. He'd make it work. He would see to it that the lost gate and all the spoils within would belong to him in the end. Queek stomped through the Under-Empire tunnels, muscles twitching with excitement, claws twitching on the hilts of his blades. Council summoned. Yes. Yes, a call to war. He was sure of it. They wanted him, the greatest, the best, to lead a massacre of the stunted things. Dwarfs! His tails lashed with joy at the thought of their bearded heads rolling beneath his paws. When he reached the council doors, Queek shoved them open without a care. He entered the room with a sneer, eyes gleaming with bloodlust as he regarded the council members lined in shadowy rows. Oh, he knew they feared, respected him. Queek Headtaker, mighty champion of Clan Moors. As a big black hunch, his body bent, his mind was back in the game with the council. The hunch seemed like better. "Queek," one of the council members said, a smile of dark approval in their voice. "You have been chosen for a most glorious task. Yes, yes." Queek's chest puffed with pride. Queek will slay all who stand in Queek's way. Dwarfs, stunted things, their skulls will be Queek's trophies. Yes, yes, another council member agreed, clearly pleased. But this mission, this assault on the Lost Gate, will require coordination. It has been decided that you shall have a co-commander. Queek's eyes narrowed, lips pulling back in a sneer. What? Who? Queek needs no other. Queek is enough to kill, slay all. Greyseer Skrivax, the council member answered, and Queek's snarl deepened into a growl. Skrivax will use his magic wits. Yes, yes, while you do what you do best. A low growl rumbled in Queek's throat. Greyseer Skrivax? He had no patience for scheming things, the cowardly magic furs who thought themselves so clever. Clever. He wanted blood. Blood, not spells. But if it meant getting his claws on the Lost Gate, he could tolerate the rat wizard, for now. Fine, yes, yes, he snapped, baring his teeth. But if he gets in Queek's way, Queek will make sure Skrivax's head joins the dwarfs on Queek's trophy rack. The council gave a faint hiss of approval, clearly entertained by the idea. Yes, yes, very good, good. Now go, Headtaker, and make the Under-Empire proud. With a final snarl, Queek turned on his heel and stalked from the chamber, tail lashing with excitement. Ah, Skrivax, Greyseer fool mage, could think scheme all he wanted. In the end, Queek would be the one to paint the Lost Gate red with dwarf blood. Chapter 2. Rallying the Horde. Skrivax scuttled through the dim-lit tunnels, his eyes gleaming with cunning, as he looked over the swarming ranks of Skaven warriors. Yes, yes, a sight most pleasing, clan rats, storm vermin, slaves, all pressing together in the cramped, filthy depths, their red eyes blinking up at him with a mix of awe and fear. A sneer curled his lips. Fools, yes, yes, but useful tools. They were easily swayed by power, by the promise of glory, by threats whispered in the dark. And Skrivax had all these things to give. Yes, yes, if they only bowed to him, obeyed him. He raised his staff, its tip gleaming with a faint green warp glow. His voice slipped into the sickly sweetness he used when addressing the horde. Listen here, yes, yes, to me, wise Skrivax, the chosen of the council, favored of the horned rat. I lead you to glory riches, to victory blood. You shall feast, yes, yes, upon dwarfen flesh, flesh, and taste, taste the sweetness of conquest. He felt the eager murmur run through them, tails twitching with excitement. Yes, yes, simple fools, all so easy to stir with words and promises. His followers, his pawns, ripe for manipulation. But just as he felt the flush of satisfaction, he heard a snarl from behind him, deep and vicious. Skrivax turned, his fur prickling, as he caught sight of Queek Headtaker striding into view. The brutal warrior glared at the assembled Skaven, eyes burning with contempt. Skrivax's lips twitched, the beginnings of a smirk. Let the fool think he could inspire loyalty through mere violence. He would see soon enough, yes, yes, that true loyalty was one with whispers, with dark promises. Queek sneered as he marched into the horde of assembled Skaven, pushing past the mass of fur and claw without a second thought. Queeky-kai weaklings, all of them. He could smell their fear. The way they huddled and looked to that gray-furred magerak Skrivax. Bah! He'd teach them what true strength looked like. He'd teach them that loyalty was carved in blood and bone. One of the clan rats at the front, a mangy, scruffy creature with a bent tail, turned to him with wide, uncertain eyes. Queek growled, baring his teeth in a grin. "You! There!" he snapped, pointing a claw at the rat. "What makes you fit worthy to march under Queek Headtaker's command?" The clan rat stammered, his tail twitching. I serve for the well. Yes, yes, fight hard for the horned rat." Queek's snarl widened. Pathetic. He seized the rat by the scruff and dragged him forward, his claws digging into the clan rat's fur. "Serve fight well, you say, Queek. Not enough. Queek wants fear loyalty, not weak words." And before any Skaven could blink, Queek drew one of his blades and rammed it through the clan rat's chest, twisting it with savage relish. Blood spattered across the dirt floor as the rat choked and went limp, and Queek let the body drop with a sneer. The watching Skaven flinched back, murmuring in hushed tones, their tails coiling, as they looked upon Queek with a mixture of fear and awe. Good, good, he thought, satisfied. They should know who their true master was. Let them see. Let them learn that Queek was not like Skrivax, whispering sly words in the dark. Any others? Any who think they can disobey Queek? Ah! He raised his voice in a snarl, and the horde shrank back in terrified silence. Eee! Queek's chest puffed with satisfaction. He sighed, and the horde shrank back in terrified silence. Queek. He raised his voice and gave the same enunciation in his voice, in the same low resonance. The chorus snarled and trembled with each. Skrivax watched, forcing his expression into a mask of detached interest as Queek's blade sank into the clanrat. His mind whirred, analyzing the brutal display. Queek was a savage, a blunt instrument, yes, useful in battle, no doubt, but reckless. Such mindless violence could turn on him if he wasn't careful. For now, Skrivax played his role, giving Queek an approving nod, though he kept his thoughts hidden behind a careful smile. Yes, let Queek think he had impressed him. Let him strut, believe he had earned respect. But inwardly, Skrivax's mind was already racing with plans. Queek's tactics might instill fear, yes, but fear was volatile. Skaven did not follow simply because of fear. They craved a future, a promise of something greater, and only he, Skrivax, could give them that. He turned to address the horde once more, lifting his staff, letting its green glow wash over the crowd. Yes, witness the strength of Queek Headtaker, mighty killer slayer. Together, with his might and my cunning, we shall tear down the lost gate and bring glory treasure to all Skaven. The horde let out a faint, uncertain cheer, tails twitching with nerves and anticipation. Skrivax could sense their unease, the way they looked at Queek with wide eyes, their loyalty frayed by terror. Good, Skrivax thought, hiding a sly smile. He had planted a seed of doubt. He knew that loyalty gained through fear could easily be redirected, twisted. It would not take much for him to win them over to his side. Yes, let Queek believe he ruled with terror and blood. Skrivax would rule with whispers and promises, and in the end it would be he who held their true loyalty. But for now, he bowed his head and nodded, speaking words of cooperation, while in his mind schemes wove and twisted like a coil of snakes. Chapter 3. The March Through the Under-Empire. Skrivax scurried ahead of his retinue, his staff clinking softly against the stone, its warp glow casting flickering shadows along the damp, twisting tunnels. Around him, the low hum of chittering Skaven voices filled the passageways, punctuated by the occasional clash of blades or hissed threats. His mind churned with plans, each more cunning than the last. The lost gate loomed ahead, a glittering prize, but there was no reason Queek should be allowed to share in the glory. No, Skrivax alone should taste the spoils, claim the artifacts. The warrior rat was all muscle, no mind, and would surely charge recklessly into any danger Skrivax set in his path. Yes, a delightful scheme. I still just be curious, especially if twitched in amusement, as they lurking in the tunnels. His whiskers twitched in amusement. As it lay lurking in the tunnels, his forces would be funneled toward any danger that lay lurking in the tunnels. His whiskers twitched in amusement as they lurking in the tunnels. Ha ha. His biggest word here, especially if he were still skipping the tattles. His whiskers twitched in amusement, as if someone was stumbling into an ambush, bleeding and cursing. Enough to weaken him, not enough to kill him, not yet. Suddenly he heard the familiar clash of steel and the guttural roars of green-skinned voices ahead. Skrivax stopped, his ears perked, tail flicking with interest as he sensed his scheme bearing fruit. The sounds of brutal combat echoed through the tunnels. Yes, precisely as planned. The tunnel reeked of blood and iron, and Queek's heart thudded with raw, savage joy. His claws itched for battle, his eyes wide and gleaming with bloodlust. Around him, his storm vermin roared and surged forward, a tide of black-furred bodies, weapons raised high. And then, at the bend in the tunnel, they came face to face with a horde of greenskin raiders, as foul-smelling and ugly as the vermin tales said. Perfect. Queek grinned, baring his fangs. Come, weak things die squeal before Queek's blades. With a howl, he launched himself into the thick of battle, his twin blades a blur of steel as he slashed, twisted and sliced through the green-skinned ranks. Their shrieks of pain filled his ears, filling him with an intoxicating fury. The greenskins were brutish, but stupid, barely able to keep up with his relentless pace. Heads rolled, limbs flew, blood spattered across the tunnel walls in thick, gleaming arcs. A clawed hand brushed his shoulder. He snarled, twisting to see a Kleinrat tugging at him, eyes wide with panic. Queek, greenskins, too many. We lose storm vermin, yes. Queek snarled and shoved the rat away, his nostrils flaring. Queek cares not. Weak fools die. Queek does not care. But as he glanced around, he noticed the bodies piling up. Skaven bodies, his own forces, hacked to pieces by the green-skinned brutes. Too many. Far too many. His eyes narrowed with growing suspicion. This was wrong. Why so many here, in this part of the tunnels? Why had his scouts failed to warn him? His eyes drifted toward the distant, shadowy form of Skrivax, standing at a safe distance, watching with a calm, calculating expression. The sight made Queek's fur prickle, his claws itching with the urge to tear that smug look off the Greyseer's face. Was it possible? No, surely not. But perhaps? Skrivax was clever. Clever, he knew that. Too clever for Queek's taste. Queek gritted his teeth, the suspicion blooming in his mind, dark and hot as he resumed his assault. But this wasn't over. No. Once this slaughter was finished, he'd have words with that rat wizard. He would be watching Skrivax, watching every sly move, every whisper. If he found even a hint of treachery, Queek swore he would see Skrivax's head on a spike. At a safe distance from the carnage, Skrivax watched, a faint, satisfied smile curling his lips. The scene unfolded beautifully, just as he had anticipated. Queek, in his mindless rage, charged into the thick of the greenskin horde, his blades flashing as his storm vermin fell around him. A few carefully whispered misdirections had been all it took to lead Queek's forces directly into the path of the greenskin patrols, thinning his numbers and leaving him vulnerable. But as he watched, Skrivax noticed something in Queek's movements, a strange, calculating glance cast in his direction between the flashes of his blood-drenched blades. The brute was suspicious, was he? Perhaps Queek was not entirely the blind savage Skrivax had assumed. A faint pang of unease stirred in him. Skrivax narrowed his eyes, forcing himself to remain calm. Let the fool think what he would. Suspicion was a tool, a weapon, something Skrivax could twist to his advantage. If Queek grew wary, Skrivax would simply play the innocent, speak soothing words, offer promises of greater glory and rewards. Yes, he would calm the warrior, manipulate his rage, and keep his control. In the end, Queek's suspicions were irrelevant. As long as he charged forward, as long as he drew the blood and took the blows meant for Skrivax, the Greyseer's victory was assured. With a final glance at the blood-strewn tunnel, Skrivax turned, his mind already whirring with the next phase of his plan. Chapter 4. Secrets of the Lost Gate. The air grew colder as the Skaven army neared the Lost Gate, the ancient fortress looming like a dark omen in the distance, its walls etched with old, powerful runes that pulsed with barely contained magic. Skrivax's nose twitched with excitement and anxiety. His eyes gleamed as he looked upon those stones, the whispers of power vibrating from their very surface. Yes, yes, the dwarfs were fools to believe their stony magic could keep him out. Only he, wise, clever Skrivax, could pierce the mysteries of their runes, could strip away their protections and seize the treasures hidden within. His claws tightened on his staff, and his tail flicked with anticipation. The others, the warrior rats, the clan rats, the chittering throngs, they saw only an ancient fortress, but he saw a prize, a grand victory that would raise him above all others in the Under-Empire. Without hesitation, Skrivax lowered himself to the ground, casting a circle of glittering warpstone dust around him. He chanted in the ancient tongue of Skave spells, the words dripping with malice and greed. His eyes closed as he let his senses stretch beyond his own sight, slipping into the world of dark visions and ancient secrets. A vision stirred. Runes flared into focus, layered thick upon the stones of the Lost Gate, each one binding magic older than he had ever tasted. His mind brushed against it, and a surge of potent energy shot through him, sending a shiver from his whiskers to his tail. Power, yes. Yes, power, such as few could imagine. The kind that could make him the most fearsome Greyseer in Skavendom. He sensed traps, yes, wards meant to shatter and scorch any who dared trespass, but Skrivax had ways around such defenses. He could feel the threads of the rune magic, twisting, binding, just waiting to be unraveled by one as wise, clever as himself. And beyond those wards, he glimpsed the true prize, riches upon riches, ancient Dwarven relics, weapons that glowed with a deadly light, caches of rare metals and gems. And there, at the heart of it all, he saw a great warpstone shard, gleaming with promise. His heart quickened, and his lips curled into a wicked smile. He could almost touch it, feel its weight, its pure, intoxicating energy pulsing through his claws. Yes, he would have it. He would claim it all for himself, and no one would share in his glory. He blinked his eyes open, the vision fading. A heady rush of power and ambition flooded his veins. Yes, this was his destiny, his alone. Queek knew nothing of this. Only Skrivax had the intellect to comprehend such prizes, the cunning to overcome these defenses. The warrior fool would charge in like a blind beast, setting off every trap, while Skrivax watched and waited. He gave a hasty look back, where Queek paced impatiently, blades flashing in his claws as he scowled at the fortress with his usual rage. Skrivax allowed himself a smug twitch of his whiskers. Queek would be his pawn. Yes, let Queek believe he would share in the rewards. Skrivax would tell him nothing of the rune-warded defenses, nothing of the traps that awaited. Let the fool charge in and suffer the consequences. When the time was right, when Queek had spilled enough blood and taken enough hits, then Skrivax would step in. He alone would weave the spells, break the runes, and claim the treasures that lay beyond. And when he stood victorious, the lost gate at his back and its riches before him, he would see Queek's astonished, defeated gaze, and he would savor every moment of it. "Yes," he whispered to himself, the words slipping out in a venomous hiss. "All shall be mine, mine alone." With a final furtive glance at Queek, Skrivax rose, the ritual complete. His mind brimming with schemes, he prepared to unleash them. Chapter 5. Power Struggle. Queek's patience snapped, his claws twitching with fury as he watched Skrivax skitter back from the lost gate. The Greyseer's smug, slinking form grated on his nerves. He could see the rat wizard's tail flicking in satisfaction, his eyes darting with secrets. Skrivax had been muttering, hiding in shadows, casting his sniveling spells. And what had it gained them? Nothing. No blood, no battle, no glory for Queek. With a snarl, Queek shoved past his storm-vermin, tail lashing with every step. His voice rang out, harsh and biting. "Skrivax, you hide whisper like coward rat, wasting Queek's time. We should be charging, killing. But no, you stalled a lair. What are you hiding?" The Greyseer turned, his eyes narrowing, whiskers twitching, as if stifling a sneer. Queek, mighty Headtaker, does not understand the value of patience. Cunning, no. Skrivax must prepare, yes, find safe path through the runes, or all will perish. Words, words! Queek's claws clenched around the hilts of his blades, his fury boiling over. You are stalling, scared, fearful to go first, to face fight blood. Queek does not need your trick spells. Queek will crush, kill all who stand in his way. The storm vermin nearby took nervous steps back, their red eyes darting from Queek to Skrivax. Their fear only fueled his rage further. He wanted to see action, not whispering schemes. Skrivax's treachery lay thick in the air, reeking of distrust and cowardice, and Queek had had enough. If Skrivax thought he could control him, keep him waiting, he was sorely mistaken. Queek took a menacing step forward, blades glinting in the dim light. Queek will lead charge Greyseer, with or without you. If you are so afraid, fearful, stay behind and let Queek do what he does best. Skrivax's fur bristled as Queek advanced, the warrior's fury a physical presence, his muscles coiled with barely contained violence. The brute's stupidity was infuriating. Did he not understand the importance of caution, of cunning? Queek's blades were useful, yes, but the Headtaker was all rage, all bluster, with no sense for strategy. The corner of Skrivax's mouth twisted into a faint, condescending smirk as he held up a clawed hand, signaling his followers to hold back. His eyes gleamed with a dark amusement as he looked Queek over, calm in the face of the warrior's obvious bloodlust. Yes, mighty Queek Headtaker, he said smoothly, letting a hint of sarcasm slip into his voice. Rush forward like a blind, stupid fool if you so desire. But know this, Skrivax warned you. There are runes, wards. You charge now, and you trigger them all. Then perhaps Queek's head will be taken by Dwarven magic. He let the words sink in, watching with satisfaction as Queek's eyes narrowed, the anger giving way to a flicker of caution. Skrivax knew Queek hated him, would love nothing more than to bury those vicious blades in his fur. But the thought of facing unknown magical traps would give even the Headtaker pause. Queek's lip curled, his fury not quite extinguished. Queek does not care fear of dwarf magic. Queek will break them, kill all, and take the glory for himself. Skrivax forced down a hiss of irritation, barely keeping his composure. The brute was too proud, too volatile to see reason. His plan, his careful plotting, would mean nothing if Queek decided to rush headlong into danger. He needed to pacify the fool, at least. For now. Yes, Skrivax said smoothly, putting a note of appeasement in his tone. Queek is brave, fearless, yes. But even Queek can use... Wait a moment, no. Give Skrivax just enough time to weaken, to unravel these protections. Then Queek can lead charge into blood and glory, unimpeded, without spells to hinder. Queek growled, his claws twitching with barely restrained violence, but his followers, nervously shifting behind him, gave subtle nods. They didn't want to face the dwarfish wards either, not if Skrivax could disable them first. Skrivax saw Queek's hesitation and pressed further, sensing victory. Let me work, Queek. Dan, your path will be clear. More dwarfen skulls for Queek's trophy rack, yes. Skrivax's eyes gleamed. We both win. Queek's muscles tensed, fury vibrating through him as he glared at Skrivax, barely listening to the Greyseer's smooth, sly words. He wanted to kill, to fight, to spill blood. What use were words? Words. He knew deep in his bones that Skrivax was stalling, slowing him down, plotting, always plotting. But his storm vermin stared at him, their faces lined with unease, and Queek knew if he charged now, alone, he'd face more than dwarves. The council would hear of it. His storm vermin would lose faith, might even betray him. With a snarl he lowered his blades, though his claws still twitched with fury. "Fine, fine, Greyseer," he spat, each word a dagger. "But if Skrivax lies, tricks, quick, we'll take his head. No magic tricks will save you." He bared his teeth in a savage grin, ensuring Skrivax understood the threat, the promise of what awaited him if he failed. The threat hung in the air like the edge of a blade, but Skrivax only inclined his head in a mock bow, forcing a smile. "Yes, yes, Headtaker, Skrivax knows his place. Together we shall crush, kill all who stand in our path." He turned back toward the lost gate, hiding his smirk. Let Queek think he had won. Let him believe he had asserted his authority. In the end, it would be Skrivax who claimed the true rewards, leaving Queek in the dust. For now, though, he had given the warrior what he wanted: reassurance that blood would spill soon. Let the fool feel satisfied. It was only a matter of time before Skrivax's schemes bore fruit. They walked on, each lost in his own thoughts of betrayal, both Skaven plodding silently, neither truly trusting the other. Their uneasy truce was as fragile as a whisper, but for now it would have to hold. At least until the time was right for Skrivax to strike. Chapter 6: The Assault on the Lost Gate begins. Skrivax's heart raced with a heady mixture of fear and delight as he took his place on a rocky outcropping overlooking the Lost Gate. The fortress stood as a formidable rune-carved monolith, defying the Skaven horde gathered below, its ancient walls thrumming with dwarfish magic. He could feel the weight of its defenses pressing against him, challenging him. But he was Greyseer Skrivax. He had never met a power he could not bend to his will. He raised his staff high, calling forth the sickly green warp energy that crackled and coiled around him, lighting the darkness of the cavern like distant lightning. The horde watched in awe, fear, their eyes gleaming in the warp light as they awaited his signal. Behind him, Queek paced with barely contained impatience, his claws twitching on the hilts of his blades. "Hold, hold," Skrivax hissed at him, not even bothering to turn around. "Too soon, too soon. Let Skrivax weaken the walls first. Yes, yes, or you charge only to die, fail." Queek growled, but Skrivax felt a small twinge of satisfaction as the warrior held his place. Fools like Queek had no understanding of tactics, of subtlety. They were all fire, all fury, but without direction. It was his mind, his magic, that would open the Lost Gate. He'd make sure Queek knew that well by the end of this battle. He closed his eyes, focused on the runes etched into the fortress walls, and began to chant. His voice wove through the dark, guttural Skaven spell tongue, each word heavy with power. The warp light intensified, swirling in a storm of green energy that lashed out toward the walls. It hit with a thunderous crack, shattering stones, unraveling layers of ancient magic. The walls of the Lost Gate trembled, cracks webbing through the surface, and Skrivax's whiskers twitched with triumph. Soon, very soon, the gate would give way, and the spoils within would be his. And then from the corner of his eye he caught a flash of movement. His heart sank. Enough waiting. Enough. Queek's muscles tensed. his blood boiling as Skrivax droned on with his irritating chants, his swirling, pointless green lights. Every second wasted was an insult to Queek's patience, a mockery of his strength. They had the numbers, the power, and the Headtaker was ready to kill, to slay. Why waste time with this mumbling nonsense? Skrivax was weak fool, frightened of dwarf and stones. Queek had no fear of stone walls or glowing marks. Dwarfs were nothing. And so, with a wild, furious bellow, he raised his blades and charged forward, his storm vermin rallying to his side, their roars filling the air as they surged after him. Forward, kill, slay, for Queek, for Clan M. He barreled toward the walls, his eyes fixed on the crack Skrivax had made. All he needed was a foothold, a single breach to tear through and the fortress would fall. He would be the first to set foot inside, to claim the heads of every dwarf who dared face him. But as his forces neared the walls, a thunderous roar erupted from within the fortress. Boulders tumbled from above, smashing through his ranks. Queek barely ducked in time, the wind from the falling stones whipping past him. Dwarfs, armored and grinning with grim satisfaction, appeared at the top of the walls, axes raised high. They had been waiting, lying in ambush. Queek snarled, blades flashing as he hacked through the storm of debris and stone. His storm vermin fell around him, crushed under boulders, skewered by dwarfish crossbows. The air was thick with death, but Queek only felt anger. Skrivax. It was his fault. His fault the dwarfs were ready. His fault the assault was failing. Queek's chest heaved with fury as his storm vermin faltered, hesitating as the dwarven defenses bore down on them. "Get up! Move for it! Kill! Slay!" he roared, cutting down a clan rat who dared to cower in his path. His eyes blazed with rage as he glanced back to where Skrivax stood, smug and safe. "Skrivax, coward thing!" he shrieked, his voice a furious hiss over the sounds of battle. "This is your doing. You led Queek's forces to fail. Die!" Skrivax clenched his teeth, his claws digging into his staff as he watched Queek's premature charge end in disaster. The dwarves had been waiting, and now they rained death upon the Skaven horde, cutting them down with brutal efficiency. His heart pounded with irritation, his whiskers bristling, as Queek turned to scream accusations his way. The nerve, the audacity. Queek had charged too early, spoiling the plan. Skrivax had nearly cracked the defenses, nearly disabled the wards, but Queek's impulsive fury had ruined it all. The brute had no patience, no understanding of the power Skrivax wielded. He was all muscle, no mind. "Fool, fool," Skrivax spat, his voice rising to match Queek's venom. "You ruin, break everything. I warned, I cautioned, but no. Headtaker must rush, kill, never wait to think." Queek bared his fangs in a snarl, his blades dripping with blood, his eyes burning with hatred. Skrivax met his gaze with equal contempt, forcing himself to ignore the crashing stones, the cries of the dying, the dwarfen defenses that loomed as an ever-present threat. He was in control. He would make Queek understand that, whether the warrior wanted to or not. "Come on, Dan Skrivax," Skrivax hissed, thrusting his staff toward the wall once more, summoning another surge of green warp light to crack through the defenses. He could feel the runes weakening, breaking apart under his magic. He glanced back at Queek, letting his anger flash openly. Now, charge if you must, but know this blood is on your paws, Queek. Queek's eyes narrowed, and he let out a low, rumbling growl, barely hearing Skrivax's hissing accusations. It didn't matter to him. Skrivax's tricks, his failures, they were beneath him. All that mattered was the blood, the fury, the glory, waiting just beyond those cracked walls. With a final glare at the Greyseer, Queek raised his blades high, his snarl turning to a vicious grin. Fine, let the wizard rat waste his breath. Queek was no coward, no sniveling fool. He would be the first to breach those walls, to tear through the dwarfs, to claim victory with blood and steel. Queek does not need spells, coward worm, he sneered, raising his voice to rally his troops. Come, for Moors, for Queek, Killslay, death to dwarfs. With a bellow he charged again, the remaining storm vermin following his lead as they surged forward. This time there was no stopping him. Stone, spells, dwarfs, all would fall beneath his claws. Let Skrivax sulk and cower. The glory of the lost gate would belong to Queek, and Queek alone. Chapter 7. The Dwarven Counterattack. The thunder of dwarven boots and the low, ominous rumble of war horns reverberated through the tunnels, making Skrivax's fur stand on end. His nose twitched as he caught the scent of steel, blood, and yes, unyielding dwarvish resolve. The stunted things had mounted a counterattack, surging from the lost gate like a storm, their axes gleaming, their armor impenetrable. They were coming to drive out the Skaven horde, to reclaim the land. Skrivax's heart drummed with both panic and grim satisfaction. He had expected resistance, yes, but this was fierce, organized, too precise for his liking. They were pushing forward with brutal efficiency, cutting through the Skaven ranks like a blade through rotten meat. Already, his lesser followers faltered, their high-pitched shrieks filling the tunnels as they staggered backward, their resolve splintering under the weight of the dwarven advance. Held weak things? Skrivax hissed, raising his staff, its tip blazing with warp energy. He had to stop this, had to hold the line or risk watching his plans unravel. The horde was crumbling, yes, and even his own storm vermin showed signs of fear. He cursed inwardly, knowing he would have to work with Queek, the savage fool, to keep the dwarfs from reclaiming the fortress. "Queek!" screeched, his voice grating over the sounds of battle. "Fight! Kill! Show your strength! Crush them now, or we lose all!" Queek's heart pounded with fury as he watched his storm vermin reel from the dwarven onslaught, their weak wails cutting through the din of battle. Pathetic, all of them. He could hardly believe his eyes as he watched the stout things drive his troops back with methodical, brutal strikes. The dwarves showed no fear, no hesitation, just cold, deadly purpose that enraged him. "Useless weaklings!" he spat, his bloodied blade swinging in wild arcs as he charged toward the front lines. The dwarfs advanced like a wall of iron, their shields locked tight, axes raised, their grim faces barely flickering with emotion. They weren't like Skave. They didn't break or cower or run. But neither did Queek. Oh, he would show them. He would make them regret every step they took. Queek's voice rose above the clash of weapons, guttural and fierce. "Skaven, fight, kill! Dwarf things die squeal today." His blades flashed as he lunged forward, hacking through armor and bone, the red mist of blood clouding his vision. He felt the bones crack under his claws, heard the grunts of pain from his enemies, but still they pushed forward, relentless. And then, above the noise of battle, he heard that hissing voice, Skrivax, the Greyseer perched safely in the rear, calling for Queek to kill slay, to fight harder. Queek's fur bristled at the nerve of that scrawny worm, the rat who thought himself above true bloodshed. But there was no time to turn on him, not yet. He needed every ounce of fury, every swing of his blade to hold the line. Greyseer. Queek snarled through clenched teeth, swinging his blade to cleave through a dwarf's helmet. If you do not kill Crush with magic now, then Queek will kill you next. The threat only intensified Skrivax's disgust, but he knew Queek was right. The dwarfs were advancing with frightening speed, and his own underlings were useless against their unwavering wall of steel. Skrivax had no choice. If he wanted his prize, if he wanted any Skave to survive this assault, he would have to put aside his contempt for Queek and unleash his full power on the Dwarven horde. Holding his staff high, Skrivax chanted words of dark magic, his voice rising in a harsh, guttural cadence as he called upon the power of the warp. The air thickened, buzzing with malignant energy, and the ground beneath his paws began to tremble. He forced his concentration, ignoring the chaos around him as he shaped the energy into a swirling greenish vortex. Yes, yes, Tastefield, the power of the horned rat. Foolish, stunted things, he screeched, directing the vortex toward the thickest part of the dwarven line. The warp light lashed out, crackling as it struck the dwarfs, sending the unlucky ones sprawling, their armor melting as they screamed. Skrivax felt a rush of satisfaction as he watched the dwarves falter, their line bending, if only slightly. Queek took the opportunity, lunging into the fray, his blades flashing as he hacked through the stunned dwarfs. The warrior was a frenzy of blood and fury, a living whirlwind of violence that even Skrivax had to admire, though he would never admit it. Queek's savagery, combined with Skrivax's magic, began to stem the tide of the dwarven advance, forcing the stunted things back, step by bloody step. Queek's blood pumped faster with every dwarf that fell before him. He could feel the heat of Skrivax's magic whirling around him, the warp energy scorching the air as dwarfs screamed and melted under the power. Yes, yes, this was the way it should be. Magic and might, fire and fury, breaking the dwarfs into pieces. He let out a savage, triumphant roar, his blades soaked in blood as he carved through another dwarf who dared to stand in his way. The Greyseer was useful, for now, though Queek could barely stand the thought of giving him any credit. Skrivax's schemes meant nothing if he couldn't stand on the front lines, face to face with the enemy, feeling the thrill of the kill. Skrivax, Queek snarled, barely glancing back at the Greyseer. See what Queek does. Watch, learn, coward rat. This is how you take the lost gate." Skrivax's tail lashed, and he forced himself to bite back a retort. Queek's brutish arrogance was unbearable, but even he could not deny the effectiveness of their combined assault. The dwarven line was faltering, their defenders struggling under the onslaught of both Queek's ruthless blades and his own warp-fueled magic. Together, they were driving back the counterattack, grinding the dwarves down until their morale and strength began to waver. But he would not give Queek the satisfaction of seeing any approval in his expression. The fool needed to be kept on a leash, reminded of his place. "Yes, Queek," he said, his voice a cold hiss. "You kill slay well, but do not forget, it is my magic that weakens them, makes them easy prey for your blades." The alliance was tense, brittle, and yet it held, if only because they both understood that alone they might fail. But Skrivax knew this was temporary, a ceasefire between rivals, nothing more. The real fight, the true test, would come after they claimed the lost gate, when the rewards were laid out before them. For now, however, he would allow Queek his moment of savagery. They needed to win this battle first, to break the dwarven spirit and take what lay hidden within the fortress walls. Only then would he see to it that Queek's glory was snatched away. With a final muttered incantation, Skrivax sent another bolt of searing warp-light into the dwarven ranks, and he watched with grim satisfaction as the last of the dwarven resistance began to crumble. Chapter 8. Tunneling Toward the Prize. The sounds of war had faded, but Skrivax's mind pulsed with renewed schemes. The dwarves had proven resilient, too resilient, and the thought of a prolonged, costly siege grated on him. Blood was valuable, yes, but blood alone could not breach the lost gate without devastating their forces. No, cunning was needed, his cunning. Skrivax's sharp eyes gleamed as he relayed his new plan to Queek, his voice soft and oily, dripping with persuasive intent. "We cannot fight, kill from the front," he hissed, gesturing to the walls that loomed, unbroken above them. No. The dwarfs are stubborn, stone-headed. We go beneath. Yes, dig burrow into their fortress's heart, into the deep chambers where they hide the treasures we seek. It is smarter, yes, wiser. He watched Queek's face carefully, noting the twitch of the warrior's whiskers, the low growl barely contained in his throat. He knew Queek despised this idea, hated the thought of sneaking rather than charging forward in a glorious assault. But Skrivax also knew how to appeal to his lust for power. "You, mighty Queek," he added, his voice dripping with feigned respect, "will be the first to taste dwarf blood once we breach the deep chambers. You will have your glory, but only if we strike cunning cleverly from below." After a tense pause, Queek's snarl twisted into a reluctant nod. Skrivax could see the begrudging acceptance in his eyes, the barely restrained frustration. Good. Let Queek simmer with impatience. As they tunneled, Skrivax would be planning, always a step ahead. Queek wanted to spit in Skrivax's face. Tunnel digging, like a craven worm, rather than crashing through the walls with blood and fury, it was coward's work. Queek's teeth clenched as he pictured Skrivax lurking in the shadows, thinking, scheming, while Queek's blades hung idle. But even Queek, in his bloodlust, could see the sense in it. The dwarfs were too well protected at the front. If they went beneath, they could reach the soft underbelly, catch the stunted things off guard. But he wasn't stupid fool. He knew Skrivax was plotting, always plotting. The Greyseer's plan served only Skrivax himself. Queek could feel it in his bones. "I'm Skrivax," he growled, his voice heavy with contempt. "Queek will go along with your dirt digging. But know this, if you scheme trick, if Queek senses even a hint of treachery, you will meet Queek's blades." He gathered his storm vermin, pulling them close enough to ensure Skrivax could not hear. His voice dropped low, a vicious whisper. You, and you. Oh, trap the tunnels behind us. Yes, in case the coward mage thinks to leave Queek behind. If he tries any trick scheme, you make sure he finds nothing but rubblestone." The storm vermin nodded, eyes gleaming with a mix of fear and obedience. Yes, let the Greyseer plot, but Queek would be ready, always ready. The tunnels stretched dark and narrow, the smell of dirt and stone filling the air as Skrivax's claws scraped against the rough walls. The Skaven horde moved in a cautious line, their whispers and chittering filling the confined space, every shadow a reminder of the walls pressing in around them. But Skrivax barely noticed. His mind was whirling with anticipation, his thoughts racing with possibilities. He knew Queek was watching him closely, that the warrior rat distrusted him. Skrivax could feel Queek's gaze, like the weight of a blade pressed against his back. He had seen the quiet exchange, the whispered instructions Queek had given to his storm vermin, and his mind had already begun calculating ways to turn it to his advantage. Skrivax raised a paw, signaling his followers to slow. Ahead lay a precarious stretch of loose earth, prone to collapse with the slightest disturbance. Perfect. "Forward, yes, he murmured to the climb rats in the front, his voice slick with false confidence. "Scout the path, check for danger." The clam rats hesitated, their noses twitching with anxiety, but Skrivax shot them a cold glare. His eyes narrowed. The meaning was clear: refuse and face his wrath. Reluctantly, the clan rats crept forward, their small claws scratching nervously at the earth. Skrivax smirked as he watched them tread carefully, each step potentially their last. If Queek planned on double-crossing him, then he'd soon find that Skrivax was just as willing to sacrifice others, just as ruthless. Queek's lip curled as he watched Skrivax send his clan rats ahead, the stench of cowardice radiating off the Greyseer like a disease. Always hiding, always slinking behind others, never once taking a risk himself. It disgusted Queek. If it were his decision, he would storm through, blade first, tearing apart any dwarf or trap foolish enough to stand in his way. But Skrivax's magic was useful, even if his methods were weak-worm and sneaky. Still, he wasn't about to let Skrivax get away with his trick schemes. Queek's claws itched, his patience wearing thin as he signaled to his own storm vermin. "You there," he growled, jabbing a claw at one of his soldiers. "Go forward. If there is trap danger, you spring it first, so Queek does not waste his strength on fool deaths. No, near Queek. And he shuffled forward into the shadows, his steps slow and careful. Yes, Skrivax would see. Queek knew his ways, knew he was no fool. As the storm vermin stepped into the narrow passage, Queek glanced sideways at Skrivax, baring his teeth in a mocking grin. Queek's rats are not like yours, Greyseer. They know fear but follow Queek. No need to hide scurry like scared thing. Skrivax narrowed his eyes, his mouth curling into an unpleasant smile. Oh, Queek Headtaker, he purred, his tone full of mock sweetness. If only you knew the value of patience, cunning, of subtlety. But no, you are a mighty blade, yes. No need to understand strategy. Queek growled, his fur bristling. One day, he swore, he would show Skrivax exactly what he thought of the rat's strategy. But for now, he had to restrain himself, to keep the mission intact, even if it meant playing nice with the slinking rat wizard. Every step took them deeper into the earth, closer to the heart of the lost gate. The air grew damp, the darkness pressing in as Skrivax's mind spun with schemes upon schemes. His visions of the prize ahead filled him with a feral excitement. Oh, there would be glory, yes, but only for those cunning enough to survive the traps, both Dwarven and Skaven made. As Queek's storm vermin moved forward, stepping where he'd sent his own clan rats, Skrivax felt a dark satisfaction. The fool thought himself brave, thought that his brutes could survive any danger, but Skrivax knew better. The tunnels were narrow, unforgiving. The deeper they went, the more dangerous they became. It was only a matter of time before Queek's recklessness caught up with him. Skrivax let out a low, mocking chuckle, watching Queek out of the corner of his eye. Yes, Headtaker, we grow near to our prize, he said, letting his voice slither with hidden meaning. But be wary. Careful. Many dangers ahead, many dangers. Queek's gaze snapped toward him, sharp and suspicious, his eyes narrowing. Queek does not fear dangers, Greyseer. Only cowards worry hide. Skrivax's smirk widened, his eyes gleaming in the dim light. Then lead on, mighty Queek. Show us your strength. They moved forward, step by step, each trying to test the other's patience, to bait the other into making the first move. Skrivax could feel the tension, thick as the dirt around them, his mind sharp with anticipation. He would reach the Lost Gate's prize, with or without Queek, and he would ensure that when he did, no one could challenge his claim. Chapter 9. Betrayal in the Darkness. The darkness of the tunnel swallowed Skrivax and his followers as they crept forward, their claws scrabbling over loose stones, ears flicking at every sound that echoed through the cramped space. The air was thick, suffocating, and the scent of damp earth, clogged his nose. But Skrivax could feel it, just ahead. The lost gate's heart pulsed with the promise of riches. Power. His power. He was so close. But then a rumbling noise cut through the silence, deep and ominous. His fur prickled, his claws tightening around his staff as he sensed the shift, the tremor, the way the earth seemed to hold its breath. A roar of collapsing rock echoed through the tunnel, and suddenly stones tumbled from the ceiling, crashing down in clouds of dust and debris. Skrivax let out a strangled yelp, his eyes widening, as he saw half his client rats buried under the falling rock, their squeals of agony barely audible over the thunderous cacophony. "Move! Move!" he screeched, clawing his way back as the walls began to crack, as if the entire tunnel was groaning in on itself. His tail lashed, and a wave of rage surged within him, mingling with his terror. He knew this was no accident, no simple mishap. This was Queek's doing. The fool warrior had betrayed them, set this trap in his lust for glory, and now Skrivax was paying the price. Barely managing to scramble out of the path of the collapse, he emerged from the rubble, coughing and spitting dust, his eyes blazing with fury. The realization struck him cold and hard, twisting his mind with a seething wrath that burned brighter than the pain of his injuries. This was not over. Queek would pay. He lifted his staff, channeling his rage into the warp, whispering ancient, venomous words under his breath. The air around him shimmered, taking on a sickly green glow as he summoned them, his enchanted vermin, his loyal servants. "Yes, yes, go. Feed. Destroy Queek and his rats," he hissed, his voice a dangerous whisper. The swarm of rats, their eyes glowing with the unnatural light of his magic, slithered and scurried into the darkness, their teeth and claws gleaming. They would tear Queek's forces apart, shred them like paper. Skrivax's lips curled into a snarl, his voice a low, venomous hiss. "You think to kill, betray me, Queek Headtaker. You will suffer, squeal for this. Yes, yes." Queek's ears twitched as he heard the satisfying crash of stone behind him, a sound that filled him with grim satisfaction. The trap had worked, yes, yes, just as he'd planned. He could imagine it now. Skrivax and his weak fools, scrambling, squealing, buried under rubble and dust. Let the Greyseer choke on his own arrogance, but his satisfaction was short-lived. As he turned to rally his troops forward, he caught sight of something in the dim light ahead. A swarm of eyes, hundreds of them, glittering with green warp light, their chittering voices rising in a frenzy. Rats, infused with that unnatural magic stink. Skrivax doing. The Greyseer was retaliating, sending his cursed vermin against Queek's own forces. Queek bared his teeth in a snarl, rage bubbling hot in his chest. "So the coward wants a fight, does he? Fine." Queek was ready. "Kill 'em! Crush slay Skrivax's pets!" Queek roared, his blades flashing as he swung at the nearest enchanted rat, slicing it clean in two. His storm vermin followed suit, hacking and stamping as they tried to fend off the magical swarm. But the rats were relentless, biting, clawing, burrowing into their fur. One of his storm vermin stumbled, a yowl of pain escaping his lips as the enchanted rats gnawed at his legs. Queek didn't even hesitate. With a snarl, he drove his blade into the storm vermin's neck, silencing him. Weakness had no place here. Let the rats have him. But his fury only grew as the swarm pressed on, relentless and unnatural. Every squeal, every chitter was a reminder that Skrivax had dared to strike back, that the Greyseer thought he could best Queek. The nerve, the insult of it. "Greyseer!" Queek bellowed, slashing another enchanted rat with a fierce swipe. "Queek will see your head rolling at his feet." Skrivax heard Queek's enraged scream echo through the tunnels, and a dark, twisted satisfaction filled him. Good, good. Let Queek flail, let him rage. Every step the fool took would only push him further into Skrivax's trap. The collapse had left him battered, blood trickling down his fur. His ears still ringing from the thunderous noise of stone against stone. But his rage was a sharper pain, fueling his determination. Queek thought he could play him, use him like a puppet in his brutish quest for glory. He thought his muscles, his blades, would bring him victory. No, it would be Skrivax who emerged victorious. Skrivax, who wielded the true power, the magic, the cunning. As the dust settled, he heard the muffled sounds of Queek's forces battling the enchanted rats, their screams of pain and panic, a sweet melody to his ears. Every bite, every claw strike was a small piece of revenge, a message delivered to Queek through blood and fear. This was only the beginning. He raised his staff, muttering another incantation, calling forth more power from the warp. He could almost taste the victory, feel the thrill of it building in his veins. When they finally breached the lost gate's heart, he would claim the treasures within, and Queek would be left with nothing but the ashes of his own failures. Yes, Queek, you hear me, you feel me," he hissed, his voice echoing through the tunnels. "You think to kill me? Fool, rat! I will see you dead, your bones broken, your skull crushed beneath my claws." Queek's rage only intensified as the rats kept coming, biting, scratching, relentless. His storm vermin were dropping one by one, some in agony, others too weak to defend themselves. He spat, his mouth tasting of blood and fury. This was Skrivax's work. Skrivax with his coward magic, hiding in shadows while real warriors fought and bled. He would have the Greyseer's head for this. No, not just his head. He'd take every limb, every claw. He'd make Skrivax squeal, make him beg for mercy before carving him to pieces. With a wild roar, Queek hacked his way through the last of the enchanted rats, his own blood mixing with the stinking gore of the swarm. His storm vermin regrouped around him, battered but still standing, their eyes gleaming with the same vengeful fire that burned in Queek's heart. "Skrivax!" he shouted into the darkness, his voice echoing through the tunnels. "You hide scheme, but you cannot escape Queek. When Queek finds you, you will wish for a quick death." Without waiting for a response, he snarled at his storm vermin, his gaze cold and deadly. "Forward! We find the Greyseer, and we show him what real Skaven strength looks like." As they pushed through the tunnel, Queek's mind burned with visions of Skrivax's downfall. He would take the dwarf prize, yes. Yes, but first he would make Skrivax regret every cowardly act, every trick, every plot. Queek Headtaker would be the one to stand victorious in the end, the one to claim the Lost Gate's glory, and Skrivax's screams would be music to his ears. Chapter 10. The Inner Fortress. The air was thick with the scent of ancient stone and the hum of long-buried magic as Skrivax stepped into the inner sanctum of the Lost Gate. His eyes gleamed as he took in the chamber, every inch of it lined with runes that glowed with a faint, pulsing light, casting a flickering blue glow over the towering walls. This was the heart of it, the power he had sensed, the source of everything, lay here. A faint smirk twisted his lips as he ran his claws along the edge of his staff, letting his gaze linger on the ancient symbols. Yes, dwarfish magic, strong and stubborn, but it was old, worn thin over centuries. He could feel it bending to his will already, feel it trembling as he began to murmur the words of a spell, his voice a quiet hiss that slithered through the air. But his moment of focus shattered as Queek stomped into the chamber, his beady red eyes scanning the room with blatant, greedy hunger. The brute had no appreciation for subtlety, for the delicate power woven into the very stones around them. All he saw was an obstacle, something to be conquered and crushed. Look, Greyseer, Queek sneered, his voice dripping with mockery. All these runes, this weak stone magic. Skrivax whimpers and hisses over stones, while Queek takes the glory. Skrivaland fought to keep his composure, his claws tightening around his staff. Of course Queek would act this way. He was too foolish, too blind to understand the danger simmering beneath the runes. If the warrior so much as swung his blade at the wrong one, the entire chamber would turn into a furnace of destructive magic. He turned to Queek, forcing his voice into a calm, mocking tone. Yes, mighty Queek. Charge ahead, swing at the runes. If you want to be blasted to ash bits, Skrivax does not care if Queek dies here. Queek's eyes narrowed, his snarl deepening, but Skrivax could see the flicker of caution in his gaze, the slight hesitation. Even the Headtaker was wary of something he couldn't crush with his blades. Skrivax allowed himself a small, satisfied smirk as he turned back to his ritual. His voice dipped into a darker cadence, the spell weaving itself through the air, sinking into the runes, loosening the ancient bonds. Queek's claws itched with impatience as he watched Skrivax, muttering, crouching before the runes like a frightened rat, praying to some lost god. His rage boiled hotter with each word the Greyseer hissed, each glance he cast around the chamber with that smug, all-knowing look. Queek didn't need magic to know that this place was important. The dwarf's fear was thick in the air, and Queek could almost hear the echo of their screams from ages past. But Skrivax, oh the coward, only stood there, whispering to stone. Queek spat, unable to hold back his scorn any longer. "Greyseer, you stole the laugh again!" he snapped, stepping closer, his blades glinting in the runelight. Queek does not whimper over scratches and stone. Queek claims victory, while you mumble like old weak rat. He let out a low growl, every muscle coiled with the need to act, to seize the glory that was so close. He imagined it now, the dwarfs trembling before him, their relics, their treasures, all his to take. Take. But Skrivax just sneered, his voice calm and cold as he responded, Yes, Queek, charge ahead. Test your strength if you're so certain. If you want to feel the fire of ancient magic ripping through your bones, then by all means do it. Queek's sneer faltered, only for a heartbeat. He hated the way Skrivax looked at him, with that smug confidence, that certainty that he was cleverer, wiser. But he could feel the weight of the magic in this place, the way it pulsed through the air, like a beast ready to snap. He clenched his blades tighter, his tail lashing with frustration. Fine, Skrivax, he snarled, stepping back just enough to let the Greyseer continue. Do your ritual, but know this. When Queek steps into the Hall of Trophies, it will be Queek's name they shout squeal. Queek's victory, not yours. Skrivax could barely contain his disdain as he resumed his spell, focusing on the runes as he allowed Queek's petty threats to slip by. Let the fool dream his blood-soaked fantasies. It made no difference. When the time came, Skrivax would be the one with true power in his grasp. Power that Queek could never hope to understand. He closed his eyes, his mind slipping deeper into the spell's rhythm, his voice taking on a low, guttural cadence as he poured his energy into the runes. The ancient symbols shivered beneath his touch, their glow flickering as they began to unravel. Slowly, ever so slowly, the magic loosened, the centuries-old defenses weakening. He could feel the pulse of power growing, a dark and exhilarating thrill building as he brought the ancient magic under his control. Soon the rune guards would fall, and he would claim what lay within. But his focus was shattered as Queek stepped forward again, his breath hot with impatience. "Move faster, Skrivax," he growled, his tone dangerous. "The dwarfs hid nothing here you can use. No power, no strength. Only Queek is fit to conquer this place." "Ah!" Skrivax turned, letting his irritation show in his eyes. "Queek knows nothing," he snapped, his voice sharp. "These runes hold back magic that would melt fry even Queek. One misstep, and this place burns us both to ash." He watched with cold satisfaction as Queek's face twisted, a flicker of uncertainty flickering behind his rage. Skrivax could sense the tension, the barely restrained fury, and he relished every second of it. He was teaching Queek patience, showing him the value of true cunning. In the end, Skrivax would claim the power here, and Queek would be left with nothing. "Stay back and let me work," he muttered, his tone dismissive. "You will have your blood battles soon enough, Headtaker." Queek's claws dug into the stone as he watched Skrivax with mounting impatience. Every second, the Greyseer muttered and whispered to the walls, felt like an eternity. His blood burned for battle, for the satisfaction of a blade's edge biting through flesh, for the thrill of trophies taken in victory. And yet, here he stood, waiting for this slinking rat to finish his incantations. It grated on him, Every word Skrivax spoke, every smug look, every thinly veiled insult was like a barb in his flesh. He could barely restrain himself from lunging forward, from slashing through the coward's smug smile. But he knew, in some dark corner of his mind, that Skrivax was not bluffing. The walls pulsed with energy he could feel, energy that could burn him alive if he dared a single wrong move. So he waited, but not quietly. If this takes too long, if Queek does not taste dwarf blood soon, then no magic will save you from me, he hissed, letting the threat hang in the air, his eyes blazing with a promise of violence. Skrivax only smirked, turning back to his ritual, and Queek's claws scraped the stone as he fought to hold himself back. But his time would come. When the defenses fell, he would be the first through, his blades ready to carve through anything that stood in his way. And when the fortress lay in ruins, it would be his victory, his glory, not Skrivax's. And if the Greyseer dared to think otherwise, then Queek would take another trophy for his collection, a very special one. Chapter 11. The Slayers Arrive. The air was thick with power, the ancient runes reacting to his spell work as Skrivax's voice echoed through the chamber. He could feel the energy shifting, bending to his will, or so he thought, until he heard the faint thud of heavy footsteps from the darkness ahead. His spell faltered as his nose twitched, catching the unmistakable scent of fresh blood and battle lust. Emerging from the shadows, their eyes glinting with savage determination, came a group of dwarven slayers, bare-chested, tattooed, and armed with monstrous axes that gleamed with menace. Skrivax's heart leaped to his throat. These weren't lifeless statues or constructs. These were dwarfs who lived and died for the chance to kill something like him. "No, no," he hissed, taking a step back as the Slayer's eyes locked onto him, gleaming with the insane hunger for death and glory that only a Slayer could possess. Queek, however, grinned with feral delight at the sight of the approaching dwarfs, his claws twitching over his blades. "Ah, the stunted things come to die," he snarled, eyes wide with savage glee. "Come, Greyseer, fight or fall." Skrivax glared at Queek, his fur bristling. "Fool, fool! These are slayers. They live to kill, die. Let them fight you then. Yes, yes, while I escape." But as Queek charged forward, hurling himself at the slayers with a blood-curdling screech, Skrivax realized he couldn't simply leave the warrior to face them alone. Without Queek's brute force, he would have little chance to survive the fury of these dwarven berserkers. Muttering a string of curses, he raised his staff, the sickly green glow of warp light gathering at its tip. Queek's heart thudded with excitement as he sprinted forward, his blades flashing as he met the dwarven slayers head-on. These were no coward rats, no weaklings to cower or flee. No, these stunted things were fierce, roaring with a fury that nearly matched his own. Their faces were twisted with a hunger for death, and Queek relished it. "Come, come, dwarf things," he howled, his voice rising to a fevered pitch. "Face Queek Headtaker. See what true Skaven power feels like." The first slayer met his charge, axe swinging in a brutal arc, but Queek ducked low, his blades darting into strike at the dwarf's exposed chest. Blood sprayed, yet the slayer barely flinched, pressing forward with relentless fury, his eyes locked on Queek with a fanatic's zeal. Queek snarled, excitement and fury fueling his strikes as he hacked and slashed, his claws itching with each clash of steel. Around him, more slayers poured into the chamber, their roars filling the air. Queek barely registered, Skrivax muttering behind him, the Greyseer's voice thick with fear as he chanted his spells. Queek didn't care for spells. He cared for the kill, the thrill of seeing his enemy fall. "Fight harder, Greyseer," he taunted, spinning to dodge a brutal swing. "Or stay back, Hind, like all coward wizards." Skrivax sneered, though his heart pounded with terror as he watched the blood-drenched slayers advance, seemingly oblivious to the pain of Queek's attacks. His magic would need to be precise, relentless if they were to survive this onslaught. Raising his staff, he summoned a surge of green lightning, sending it crackling toward the nearest slayer. The energy struck the dwarf in the chest, sending him staggering back, but only for a moment. The slayer's eyes burned with renewed fury as he turned his attention toward Skrivax, lifting his axe with the intent to strike. "Oh, no, stay away!" Skrivax screeched, sending another blast of energy directly at the slayer. The dwarf staggered, but still he advanced, each step a testament to his unwavering resolve. Queek glanced back with a sneer. "Can't even kill one dwarf thing," he mocked, his voice dripping with contempt. "Headtaker needs no magic to finish this fight." Ignoring Queek's taunt, Skrivax focused, forcing his energy into a concentrated blast that seared across the slayer's chest, finally driving the dwarf to his knees. But another slayer was already stepping forward, and Skrivax knew he couldn't keep up this pace alone. He needed Queek's ferocity as much as Queek needed his magic. "Very well, Headtaker," he hissed, his eyes gleaming with disdain. "Let us kill them together. Yes. Yes." Queek needed no encouragement. He was already a whirlwind of motion, his blades slashing as he met the slayers blow for blow. They were fierce, unyielding, each strike powerful enough to shatter bone, each step filled with a mad desire to die in battle. But Queek was faster, deadlier, and his fury knew no limit. This was what he craved, the thrill, the blood, the feeling of his blades biting into flesh. One slayer fell, his blood splattering the floor, but another took his place, swinging his axe with a roar that echoed through the chamber. Queek snarled, ducking and weaving, his movements a blur of claws and teeth. He could hear Skrivax behind him, muttering and screeching as his spells blasted at the dwarfs, but Queek paid him no mind. Let the Greyseer do as he pleased. It was Queek who would claim the glory here. "Die, squealed dwarf things," he roared, his voice rising to a fevered pitch as he lunged forward, his blades biting deep into another slayer's side. The dwarf gasped, blood dripping from his mouth, but his eyes were fixed on Queek with that same maddened gleam. Even as Queek cut him down, he could feel the exhaustion creeping into his limbs, the strain of the relentless battle. But he would not show weakness. Not here. Not to Skrivax. Skrivax was barely holding on, his energy waning as he poured every ounce of his power into his spells. The Dwarven slayers were relentless, barely flinching under the onslaught of warplight, their fanatical strength unlike anything he had faced before. He cursed under his breath, wishing the Headtaker would finish them faster. He sent another bolt of energy toward the last remaining slayer, watching with satisfaction as the dwarf staggered, his axe clattering to the ground. But just as he thought the battle was over, the slayer lunged, his eyes blazing with one final furious resolve. With a gasp, Skrivax stumbled back, clutching his staff, as Queek's blade finally met the dwarf's throat, slicing through flesh and bone. The slayer fell, his blood pooling on the ground, and Skrivax let out a sigh of relief, his body trembling from the exertion. As the last of the slayers lay still, both Skaven leaders stood amidst the carnage, bloodied and breathing heavily. Their victory had come at a great cost, but neither offered the other a word of thanks. Instead, they glared at one another, each seething with resentment, each silently wishing the other had been claimed by the dwarves. In silence they turned away from each other, both too proud to acknowledge their shared survival. Their battle was far from over. Chapter 12. Claiming the Runes of Power. With the Dwarven slayers finally defeated, Skrivax and Queek found themselves standing in the heart of the Lost Gate, facing the rune-inscribed walls that marked the true prize. The magic here was thick, tangible, pulsing with ancient power, and both Skaven leaders could feel its pull. But as each took a step forward, their eyes met in a hostile glare, their hatred barely contained. He took a cautious step forward, his claws reaching out to trace the lines of the runes, feeling the faint, tantalizing thrum of energy beneath his touch. He could see it all now, how he would manipulate the runes, channel their power into himself, bend it to his will. Yes, yes, he would be unstoppable, feared by all. And Queek of Whites, left to choke on the dust of his failure. But as he began to murmur the incantations, a shadow loomed beside him, and the scent of sweat and blood filled his nose. "Stand back, Greyseer," came Queek's growl, his voice thick with menace. "This belongs to Queek. Queek claims victory. Queek takes legal power." Queekfax turned slowly, his lip curling with disdain as he regarded the Headtaker. "Queek cannot even read these runes," he sneered, barely containing his contempt. "These markings are beyond you, beyond your brute claws. Only Skrivax can wield their true power." Queek's eyes narrowed, his fur bristling as he took in the flickering, glowing marks on the walls. Runes, scratched by dwarf fools, ancient magic that held the power of this place. But he didn't need to understand it, didn't need to mutter and mumble like Skrivax. Power didn't need to be read, it needed to be taken. Skrivax was there, whispering his nonsense, his greedy claws reaching toward the walls as if the place already belonged to him. The sight made Queek's blood boil, his claws itching to tear the smug look off the Greyseer's face. "Now," Queek snarled, stepping forward, his blades glinting in the low light. "Queek is the one who fought, who broke the dwarf things. Queek claims this place, these walls, this power." Skrivax scoffed, his eyes narrowing with that look of mock pity, his voice a condescending hiss. "Power, for one who doesn't know how to use it. You're a fool, Queek, a blind fool. These runes would kill you faster than you could blink. Queek bared his fangs, his rage bubbling over as he took a menacing step forward. Then you touch nothing. If Queek cannot have it, then neither do you. He swung his blade, intending to slash through Skrivax's reaching hand, to carve away the Greyseer's arrogance once and for all. But Skrivax was quick, darting back, his eyes blazing with fury. Skrivax's heart pounded as he narrowly avoided Queek's blade, the fury welling up within him. The Headtaker was a fool, a simpleton, incapable of understanding the magnitude of what lay before them. This was no mere trophy, no shiny trinket for Queek's collection. This was true, ancient magic. Power that could only be wielded by one who intelligence of cunning. By him. Enough, he hissed, raising his staff as warp light crackled around it, illuminating the chamber in a sickly green glow. Queek, you do not understand what you play with. Stand back, or I'll show you what true power feels like. Queek snarled, his own fury undimmed, his muscles coiled, ready to strike. Skrivax could see it, the battle poised to break out between them, each of them brimming with hostility. He knew that Queek would gladly see him dead, would spill his blood over these ancient stones just to keep him from laying claim to the prize. He prepared to release the energy, to strike Queek down if need be. But before either of them could move, the ground trembled, and a harsh guttural shout echoed through the chamber. Queek froze, his eyes darting to the entrance as the sound of clanging metal and the heavy stomp of armored boots reached his ears. The dwarfs, more of them, and from the look of their gleaming armor and the thick bearded leader at their head, these weren't just any dwarfs. No, these were the best, the strongest, led by a king, the one who dared rule over this stone prison. The dwarf king's gaze was a hard, burning glare, one that promised pain, death. Queek grinned, his excitement surging anew. This was what he wanted. Not quiet walls or runes that whispered. This. The chance to crush, kill a king. To see the life drained from his eyes. To add his head to Queek's growing collection. See, Greyseer, he hissed, baring his teeth. Dwarfs come to die. Let Queek show them true strength. Skrivax's eyes widened as the Dwarven king and his elite guard filled the chamber, their armor shining with intricate rune carvings, their eyes burning with grim determination. He could feel the intensity of their hatred, could see it in the way they gripped their weapons, their resolve unshaken. His initial instinct was to retreat, to fall back to safety, but he knew he couldn't leave the chamber. Not when the runes were within his reach, so close he could taste their power. If he left now, everything he had worked for would be lost. Beside him, Queek had already charged forward, his blades flashing as he let out a fierce war cry. Skrivax gritted his teeth, fighting the urge to leave the Headtaker to his fate. As much as he despised Queek, he needed his brute strength now. "Fine, fool rat," he muttered, lifting his staff as he began summoning a spell, "but don't think Skrivax does this for you." He unleashed a blast of green energy, sending it hurtling toward the advancing dwarves. The warp lights struck their shields, shattering the first row of their ranks, but still they pushed forward, undeterred. "Hold them off, Queek," he shouted, his voice laced with barely contained irritation. "Skrivax needs time to turn the magic against them." Queek barely registered Skrivax's words as he crashed into the Dwarven guard, his blades singing as they cut through the air, meeting armor, flesh, and bone. This was the battle he had wanted. The thrill of seeing the enemy falter, the taste of victory on his tongue. The Dwarf King swung a massive, rune-inscribed hammer, the weapon coming down with crushing force. Queek dodged to the side, feeling the impact shudder through the stone where he had just been standing. A wicked grin spread across his face as he lunged forward, his blade scraping against the king's armor, leaving a jagged scratch across the polished metal. "Come, come, dwarf thing," he snarled, his voice a feral growl. "Show Queek what you have." But even as he fought, he could feel the weight of their numbers pressing in on him. He was strong, yes, but the dwarfs fought with precision, each one backing the other, their shields interlocking, their movements practiced. He felt his muscles ache, his energy draining with each strike, each parry. He needed Skrivax's cursed magic whether he liked it or not. The Skrivax focused, channeling his energy, his eyes narrowing as he calculated his next move. He could feel Queek struggling, hear his furious snarls mixing with the grunts of the dwarfs, the clash of metal ringing through the chamber. He knew that if he timed it right, he could turn the tide in their favor. Lifting his staff, he uttered a final, guttural incantation, and a surge of green lightning crackled from his claws, lashing out at the dwarfs. The energy struck the floor, spreading in a jagged, glowing web that forced the dwarfs back, their formations breaking as they struggled to avoid the deadly magic. The king roared in fury, his gaze fixed on Skrivax, his eyes blazing with a hatred that went beyond mere battle. Skrivax sneered, reveling in the power, in the fear he could see in the Dwarf King's eyes, if only for a moment. "Yes, yes, see what your magic has brought upon you," he taunted, his voice sharp. "None can match the power of Skrivax." But his satisfaction was short-lived. Even as the dwarfs wavered, they regrouped, their will unbroken, their advance relentless. He realized with a sinking feeling that Queek, for all his savage stupidity, was the only thing holding the dwarfs at bay. "Queek!" he shouted, his voice dripping with reluctant desperation. "Push harder! Hold them back, or we both die!" Queek heard the plea, heard Skrivax's desperation, and he let out a savage laugh, even as he clashed with the Dwarven King, their weapons meeting in a brutal arc. "Yes, yes, Greyseer. Now you see, now you beg Queek to fight." His voice was triumphant, his strikes fiercer, sharper. "But remember, this victory belongs to Queek. All of it." With a final roar, Queek's blade found its mark, carving through the dwarven ranks, forcing them back. The king staggered, his guard thinning, his defiance faltering. In the end they stood together, battered and bloodied, the chamber littered with broken dwarfs. But as the silence settled, Queek offered no thanks, no gratitude, only a glare that promised one thing. The fight between him and Skrivax was far from over. Chapter 13. The Final Battle. The air was thick with dust, blood, and the faint, pulsing glow of ancient magic. as Skrivax stood in the center of the rune chamber, his fur matted and his breath ragged. Around him, the Dwarven king's defenders closed in, their faces hard as iron, their eyes burning with a fury that even Skrivax could respect, if only for a moment. But respect was worthless. The only thing that mattered now was the prize, the runes, the power, the victory that would secure his place above all else. He raised his staff, summoning the last dregs of his strength. His vision blurred from the toll of so much magic, but he forced his focus, channeling every ounce of malice and cunning into one final surge. The warp light crackled around him, twisted and violent, green energy arcing from his staff to strike the dwarves with relentless precision. They staggered, shields melting, beards singed, but still they pressed forward. It was then that he caught sight of the Dwarven king, towering above his guards, his armor gleaming with runelight, his eyes locked onto Skrivax with a hatred that defied reason. The king was wounded, his arm limp, but his grip on his warhammer was unbroken, his resolve undimmed. Skrivax knew that this king, this last remnant of dwarfish pride, was the key to his victory. Break him, and the fortress would fall. The power would be his. But he needed time to finish the spell that would bind the runes, that would turn this place into his own stronghold. "Queek," he hissed, casting a quick glance to where the Headtaker was hacking his way through the defenders. "Pull the king, delay him, or we lose all." Queek barely heard Skrivax's command, his blood pounding too loudly in his ears, his focus narrowed to the kill, the thrill of the last stand. He relished every clash, every scream, his blades moving faster, stronger, fueled by the fury of the battle and the glory within his reach. Around him, dwarfs fell in pieces, their blood splattering the rune-covered stone. Each swing, each step brought him closer to his true prize. And then he saw him, the Dwarf King, standing like a mountain, his eyes blazing with defiance even as his soldiers dropped around him. Queek's lips curled back in a fierce grin, his muscles coiling with anticipation. This was the head he had waited for, the one that would cement his victory above all others. His claws twitched with the need to take it, to feel the life drain as he watched a king fall before him. "Dwarf King?" Queek roared, raising his blades, his voice dripping with taunt and promise. "Come, come! See how you fare against Queek Headtaker." The king's face twisted, his own resolve hardening as he hefted his warhammer, meeting Queek's charge with a force that rattled the ground. Their weapons clashed, sparks flying as the king's warhammer collided with Queek's blades, the impact sending shockwaves through Queek's arms. But he did not waver. He pushed harder, his snarls echoing through the chamber. Around him, he sensed Skrivax's magic crackling, heard the Greyseer's hissed incantations, but Queek paid no mind. This was his fight, his victory. No rat could take this glory from him. Skrivax gritted his teeth, his irritation mounting as he watched Queek engage the king in a brutal, reckless dance of death. The Headtaker was strong, yes, but brute strength would only carry him so far against a warrior of this caliber. Still, Skrivax needed Queek to distract the king, to keep him occupied just long enough for him to bind the runes and secure the chamber's power. As the magic pooled around him, he forced himself deeper into his incantations, his voice echoing with venomous intent as he wove the spell. The runes responded, their glow intensifying, the energy within them twisting and writhing as he pulled it under his control. "Just a little more, yes, yes," he murmured, his eyes fixed on the symbols, ignoring the bloodshed around him. This was his moment, his destiny, and Queek, fool that he was, would be none the wiser. But then a tremor shook the chamber, and he looked up just in time to see Queek falter, the Dwarven king's warhammer smashing down with bone-crushing force. Skrivax felt a brief surge of satisfaction, imagining the Headtaker broken beneath that blow. But Queek, resilient and furious as ever, sprang back, his eyes blazing with a hatred that could rival even Skrivax's ambition. If he wanted his victory, he would need Queek, if only for a moment longer. The impact from the Dwarf King's hammer rang through Queek's bones, his vision blurring as he staggered back. But the pain only fueled his anger, the fire in his chest roaring hotter, fiercer. This king thought he could defy him, thought he could survive against the might of Queek Headtaker. The thought was laughable, insulting. With a snarl, Queek lunged forward again, his blade slicing at the king's armor, finding gaps where the metal had bent, weakened by the relentless assault. His claws dug in, feeling the thrill of flesh tearing under his strike, the Dwarf King grunting as blood seeped through his armor. The king's eyes flashed with pain, but still he swung, his movement slower now, his strength ebbing. Queek's grin widened, his voice a low, mocking growl. "Weak, weak, dwarf thing. You fall, die soon. Queek will take your head." The king raised his hammer one final time, a defiant roar escaping his lips. But Queek was faster. He ducked under the blow, his blade finding the dwarf's neck in a swift, brutal strike. Blood spurted, warm and thick, coating his claws as he wrenched the blade free. The king fell to his knees, his eyes dimming as he looked up at Queek, his expression one of stubborn defiance, even in death. Queek relished the sight, savored every moment as he raised his blade high and with a triumphant scream severed the king's head from his body. The trophy was his. Skrivax barely contained his disdain as Queek held the Dwarven king's severed head aloft, his triumphant screeches filling the chamber. The fool didn't realize what he held was nothing compared to what Skrivax had gained. As Queek reveled in his primitive victory, Skrivax extended a clawed hand, his eyes fixed on the runes. With a final muttered incantation, the spell completed itself, and a surge of energy flooded the chamber, centered on him. He felt the runes bend to his will, their power coursing through his veins, ancient magic twisting and turning under his command. He had won. The fortress was his. In that moment, Skrivax felt unstoppable, his vision filled with the countless ways he would use this power, how he would bring the Under-Empire to its knees, how he would rise above all others. And yet, as his eyes flicked back to Queek, his satisfaction curdled into irritation. The Headtaker, drenched in blood and triumph, was grinning like he was the true victor, like the battle belonged to him alone. Skrivax's voice slithered out, thick with mockery. "Yes, yes, Queek," he sneered. "You have a head. But Skrivax has power. This fortress, this magic, it belongs to me." Queek's eyes narrowed. His glint caught her in the dwarf's king's severed head, tightening as he turned to face Skrivax, a dangerous glint in his gaze. The Greyseer's words were like a slap, an insult to his victory, to the head he had claimed through blood and battle. "Skrivax speaks too much," he spat, his voice low and menacing. "This is Queek's win. Queek who crushed the dwarfs. Queek who takes the prize." The magic swirling around Skrivax only deepened his fury, a reminder of the Greyseer's schemes, his constant slinking manipulation. Queek's claws twitched with the urge to lunge, to end the magic rat's treachery once and for all. But he knew Skrivax's magic was strong, too strong to challenge now, not with his forces depleted, his own strength worn thin. For now, he would play along, but only until the time was right. He growled, his voice dripping with contempt. "Keep your magic tricks, Greyseer. But remember, this was Queek's victory, Queek's head." Skrivax allowed himself a cold smile, watching as Queek seethed, his eyes blazing with barely contained hatred. The Headtaker might have his trophy, might cling to his petty notions of glory, but Skrivax held the true prize. The magic. The power. "Take your head, Queek," Skrivax said, his voice dripping with mock politeness. "But remember, it is Skrivax who controls this place now. The power here, the runes, they bend to me, not you." Queek's lips pulled back in a snarl, his teeth bared, his claws flexing over the bloody dwarf king's head. The look in his eyes was pure malice, an unspoken promise of future violence. But Skrivax met his gaze without flinching. He could see Queek's frustration, the struggle between his bloodlust and the begrudging realization that Skrivax held something beyond his reach. It was a satisfying sight, one that Skrivax would savor. "Queek will not forget this, Skrivax." Queek growled, his voice low, dangerous. "One day, Queek will come for you. Yes, yes. And then we will see who is truly powerful." Skrivax gave a slow, mocking nod. "Yes? Yes, I look forward to it," he said, smoothly, though his grip on his staff tightened, ready in case Queek decided to act on his threat now. The air between them was thick with animosity, both Skave seething with hatred, each one barely restraining their urge to strike. What then? The sounds of distant movement echoed through the fortress. Skaven reinforcements, likely drawn by the echoes of battle. Both Skrivax and Queek heard it, and their shared understanding, however brief, was clear. This victory would be claimed publicly, with no blood between them for now. "Come, Headtaker," Skrivax sneered. "Let the Under-Empire see who has conquered the Lost Gate." With a final venomous glare, Queek turned and stormed toward the tunnel entrance, his tail lashing behind him. Skrivax followed, his heart still racing with triumph. He had the runes, the power, the fortress, and Queek's simmering hatred was now an added delight, a reminder that even among the Skaven, victory was sweetest when it left rivals seething. As they stepped into the light of the outer chambers, the waiting Skaven horde looked up in awe-fear, chittering excitedly at the sight of their two leaders, bloodied but victorious. Each rat knew, though perhaps they dared not say it, that the real war had just begun. In the end, the Lost Gate had been claimed, but for Skrivax and Queek, this was not the end of their rivalry. It was merely the beginning. Chapter 14. Securing the Lost Gate. The walls of the Lost Gate now echoed with the chittering of Skaven, the horde pouring in from every shadowed corner to claim what Skrivax had rightfully won. He watched them scurry, their eyes gleaming with awe and greed as they explored their new prize. The fortress was his achievement, his cunning, and yet Queek's presence lingered, a thorn in his side, strutting through the halls as if he had conquered it single-handedly. Skrivax's whiskers twitched in irritation as Queek approached, his blood-soaked blades gleaming, his eyes gleaming with a mixture of pride and challenge. Skrivax knew what was coming, the inevitable boasting, the brash claims. He resisted the urge to roll his eyes, gripping his staff tighter. Skrivax muttered, "Yes, yes." Queek sneered, casting a condescending glance at the walls now void of their ancient protections. Magic tricks may open doors, but it is Queek's blades that won the day, not weak spells. Skrivax forced a thin smile, letting his voice drip with disdain. "Queek swings slices, yes, yes, but it was Skrivax who saw the defenses, who unraveled the magic keeping us out. Without my cunning, Queek would have only found death here." He lifted his staff slightly, allowing a faint, sickly green light to pulse from its tip, a reminder of the power he had wielded to claim the fortress. Queek's lip curled in disgust, his eyes narrowing as he leaned closer, his breath hot with the scent of blood and battle. "Magic rats talk too much," he growled, his voice mocking. "Queek does not need to mutter and wave sticks to kill win. Strength conquest comes from blades, not whispers." Skrivax sneered, barely able to contain his contempt. Queek's mind was as blunt as his claws, unable to appreciate the complexities of power. The finesse needed to truly control the forces that held the Lost Gate. But he would let Queek bask in his delusion, if only to savor the moment when the Headtaker realized just how little his brute force mattered in the larger scheme. "Oh, yes, yes, Headtaker," he purred, letting his voice rise just loud enough for their surrounding followers to hear. Queek claims victory, boasts, brags, but it was Skrivax who dismantled the dwarf protections, who turned magic against them. Without me, Queek would still be scratching at the walls outside. He saw the flicker of anger in Queek's eyes, the way his claws tightened on his weapons. It thrilled him, this subtle game of one-upmanship, where each word, each boast, was a barb designed to remind Queek of his limits. But he also knew Queek's temper, the way it smoldered, and he tread carefully, enjoying the dance without pushing too far. Queek's blood boiled as he listened to Skrivax's sneering claims. The Greyseer's smug face, the way he clutched his staff as if it made him some great warlord, it infuriated Queek. Magic rats with their words and tricks, always hiding behind spells, never in the true fight. Queek did not need magic mumbling to kill-break the Dwarf King, he snapped, his voice rising to challenge Skrivax. While Skrivax hides behind his glowy stick, Queek charges forward, takes heads. Who does Skaven fear follow? Not a whisper rat, but Queek Headtaker. He holed up the severed Dwarf King's head, still dripping with blood, letting the surrounding Skaves see it, their eyes widening with admiration and fear. Queek reveled in it, in the way they looked at him, not at Skrivax. They understood strength, power, real victory, not the coward's tricks that Skrivax clung to so desperately. But Skrivax, unbothered, only tilted his head, his gaze dripping with condescension. Yes, Queek takes heads, but heads alone do not win wars. He tapped his staff against the ground, the sound echoing ominously in the stone hall. Without Skrivax, the gate would be closed shut. The magic still strong, Queek would have only seen his own doom. Queek's claws twitched, his patience fraying. He wanted to lash out, to cut Skrivax down, to show him once and for all that strength came from blood, not words. But he knew the consequences. The council watched, and any hint of disunity, any sign of a failed alliance, would reflect poorly on him. "Fine, Greyseer," he snarled, his voice low, thick with barely restrained fury. "Queek will let you whisper boast. But remember, it was Queek who broke the dwarves, who led the charge. Without Queek, Skrivax would be squealing in the shadows." Skrivax inclined his head, allowing himself a small, mocking smile. Queek's frustration was palpable, his fury barely contained, and it pleased Skrivax to see him seethe. In the end, he thought, Queek's obsession with brute force, with trophies and simple victory, would always keep them in check. Skrivax knew how to wield the subtler weapons, how to twist power and manipulate fear, a game Queek would never truly understand. Yes, hastily said smoothly, letting his voice carry a faint hint of amusement. Skrivax respects your, effort. Your killing is valuable, indeed. He paused, his eyes gleaming with the light of the runes he had claimed. But it is wisdom, not violence, that wins in the end. The words hung in the air, sharp as any blade. He watched as Queek's eyes narrowed, as his teeth bared in response, the unspoken threat lurking in every twitch of his claws. But he knew Queek would not strike here, not with the other Skaven watching. Queek's pride would not allow him to risk a challenge he might not win. And so Skrivax turned away, satisfied, casting one last glance at the runes that pulsed softly in the walls. His power, his prize. But as he walked away, he knew this truce was temporary. Queek's fury, his need for blood, would not be quenched with mere words. There would come a time when the Headtaker would seek vengeance, when their simmering animosity would erupt. But Skrivax welcomed it. Let Queek come for him. Let him try. For now he had what he wanted, the power of the Lost Gate. And as for Queek, he could keep his trophies, his brute force, and his rage. In the end, Skrivax would rise above him, and Queek would be left in the dust, another defeated enemy on the path to his ultimate conquest. Chapter 15. Return to Skavenblight and New Rivalries. The twisted labyrinthine corridors of Skavenblight were familiar yet cloying, the damp stench of Skaven bodies mingling with the smell of rot and warpstone. Skrivax felt the weight of the council's red-eyed gaze on him as he stepped into the chamber, his chest tight with anticipation and contempt for the savage, grinning fool who stalked in beside him. Each of them had come to claim victory, yet neither had any intention of sharing it. Skrivax straightened, his voice smooth and venomous as he addressed the council. Yes, great council of 13, he began, casting a quick, scornful glance at Queek. Skrivax led the mission with wisdom, carefully dismantling the dwarf's ancient defenses. But Queek was a disruption, a blunt instrument that cost us troops, with his reckless charging ways. Had it not been for my cunning, the Lost Gate would have claimed us all. Queek's lip curled, his fingers flexing dangerously on his blades, but Skrivax ignored him, lifting his head with a satisfied smile as the council muttered in approval. He relished each nod from the gray-furred figures, each murmur of appreciation for his cunning. But he knew Queek would not stay silent for long. Queek's eyes burned as he listened to Skrivax's sly, slithering lies. The Greyseer's words were like poison, meant to turn the council against him, to downplay his victory, his strength. Queek's patience wore thin, and with a snarl, he cut across Skrivax's boasting. Yes, Queek growled, his voice harsh and defiant. But it was Queek who broke the dwarf things, Queek who took their heads and claimed the trophies. He held up the bloodied dwarf king's head, letting it dangle before the council, each council member's eyes gleaming with interest. Skrivax may have muttered spells, but it was Queek who led the charge, who killed, slashed all in his path. The council leaned forward, nodding approvingly, clearly thrilled by the trophy he had taken. Queek saw the glint of satisfaction in their eyes, the thrill of a true Skaven victory. But his triumph was interrupted by Skrivax's smug, mocking tone. Yes, Queek took Tuok heads, Skrivax sneered, but heads alone are meaningless without the wisdom to secure victory. Without my magic, without my plan, Queek's charge would have been nothing but a massacre. The dwarfs were strong, yes, it was Skrivax who broke them. Queek's claws dug into his blades, his anger nearly spilling over as the council watched, their expressions intrigued, curious. The Greyseer was sly, too sly, and Queek's blood burned with the need to tear him down, to show the council what real strength looked like. The council's murmurs sent a thrill of satisfaction through Skrivax, but he didn't let his composure falter. Instead, he gave a shallow bow, feigning humility even as he felt the gaze of his rival burning into him. Queek's brutish display, his trophy, yes, it was impressive to the council's bloodthirsty members, but they valued more than brute strength. The council craved cunning, manipulation, a mind capable of leading them to greater conquests. He turned to Queek, his smile cold and sharp. Perhaps, Queek, one day you'll understand that victory requires more than blood, more than head-taking. But Skrivax knows, yes, that such understanding is beyond a simple warrior rat. Queek bared his teeth, his muscles coiling, and, for a moment, Skrivax savored the thought of the Headtaker lunging at him here, of giving the council a reason to declare Week's bloodlust dangerous. But instead, Queek's lips twisted into a snarl that chilled Skrivax's blood. Queek could feel every word crawling under his skin, each one a thinly veiled insult, a reminder of how he despised Skrivax's schemes and lies. He gripped his blades, resisting the urge to make a strike that would bring him immense satisfaction and immediate trouble. But he wouldn't forget this. No. He'd carry Skrivax's words with him like a fresh wound, something to fuel his hatred, to keep his claws sharp. He leaned forward, his voice low, just loud enough for Skrivax to hear. One day, Greyseer, Queek will see you fall, yes. Queek will take your head as easily as this dwarf king's. Your schemes will not save you then. Skrivax smirked, unaffected by the threat, his expression as smug and venomous as ever. Oh, I look forward to it, Headtaker, he replied, his tone dripping with sarcasm. Until then, enjoy your trophies. They may be the only victories you'll ever know. With that, Skrivax turned on his heel, his robes sweeping behind him as he moved past the council and into the corridor beyond, a cold smile playing on his lips. He had claimed his victory here, had cast enough doubt on Queek's success to ensure that his own role was seen as pivotal. But he knew, in the depths of his scheming heart, that this truce, this uneasy alliance, was fractured beyond repair. As he made his way back through the shadows of Skavenblight, his mind was already calculating, weaving plans within plans. Queek's brute strength was impressive, yes, but it was not enough. And when the time came, when Skrivax was ready to rid himself of the Headtaker's bluster, he would make sure Queek's fall was swift and humiliating. For now, however, he had secured the Lost Gate, and his influence in the Under-Empire would rise. Let Queek dream of his revenge. Skrivax would be prepared. Queek watched Skrivax's retreating form with a mixture of hatred and determination. The council had been fooled by the Greyseer's slippery words, but Queek knew the truth. It was his strength, his blades, that had claimed the fortress. Skrivax could hide behind his spells and schemes, but the day would come when all his tricks would fail. As he stalked through the tunnels of Skavenblight, Queek's mind burned with one purpose: to destroy Skrivax, to tear down the smug rat who thought he was better, who dared to call himself the true victor. And when that day came, Queek would take Skrivax's head and mount it high, a trophy more satisfying than any dwarf king. Until then he would wait, his claws sharp, his hatred simmering. The council could praise Skrivax's cunning, they could listen to his lies, but Queek knew that strength was the only thing that mattered in the end. Their rivalry was far from over, and the next time they crossed paths, there would be no truce, no alliance, only blood. In the cold, twisted depths of Skavenblight, the seeds of a new conflict had been sown. Skrivax and Queek, united in victory but divided by ambition, parted ways, each vowing to see the other fall. And as they disappeared into the shadows, the Under-Empire shuddered, for the coming storm would shake it to its very core.